support, Aileen. Aileen, I am discussing your post, your first post in your thread called Fear and Reality, and I'd like to walk you through your post just to assist and support with some insight and perspective in relation to the point that you faced in relation to the demon woman and fear and rules, and also within that your self-forgiveness, because in terms of having a look at the point that you're facing is a self-belief that you have manifested about yourself, and you approached your experience or the moment with that woman and the student within that self-belief, and thus within that missed the actual point in relation to the whole experience, which was all in all related directly to an as self, but that point of self was missed, and you interpreted or projected your entire experience through others instead of relating it back to self. So I'm just going to walk you through the points that you can see the whole manifestation or design, so as to, for future reference, to be able to walk your process more in relation to self than the tendency to project or attempt and try to walk one's process through others as self. So let's start with the first point, and I quote, "I experienced holding my ground, and the power of it caused fear within myself. As I stood equal with someone who perhaps considers herself to be superior to me, what I felt was the discrepancy of who she thought she was and who she actually was in this transaction." Unquote. Aileen, here is to clarify some experiences that you had that created a perception of yourself. Is the point of power that you experienced is actually an adrenaline rush as fear that manifested a force within and as which you held yourself as energy within that moment. So what you're dealing with here is that power that you experienced was actually a physical unconscious mind surge of an as fear, and that manifested like an adrenaline rush within you. And if you have a relook at your physical experience in that moment you faced that perception of power, your back, your wings at the back of your shoulders actually went tight. You had a tight, hard experience at the back of your head, and also within the center of your back there was a pressure. Now, when you experience such physical energy manifestations, that indicate possession. So what the power you perceived that you experienced in that moment was actually physical mind unconscious fear as adrenaline that you became, and thus you were not in fact actually standing equal with that person. You were the equality that you perceived, that you experienced or enacted, was actually your equality with your own energy within yourself, meaning you became that unconscious mind, physical mind manifested energy in that moment, and in that becoming stood equal as it, but within that equality you accepted and allowed yourself to be possessed by it. So it was like a becoming of you, of actual manifested unconscious mind energy as fear. And thus, within that very starting point, your whole experience with in the moment with the woman was in fact within and as and through your own manifested physical mind unconscious fear. So let us continue. More points here, and I quote, "I could see and understand this piercing was okay and marking the personal inner event of overcoming pain, and was in fact therapeutic in the context of what that child was facing within and as herself." It was a symbol of successfully integrating self-harm and self-forgiveness. As I discussed this with the uniformed policewoman, she dismissed the child and what she was doing was unhealthy, etc., etc. Usually I would back down and agree just to get away. This time I maintained eye contact and said that whilst I could see the piercing was therapeutic, I'm happy the child can continue her therapy without breaking the school rules, and any other comments about the child are necessary. I got up having agreed that it was not in the interest of what was best for all if in fact she broke the rule on this specific point, and she could take out the bar whilst in school and put it back in after school. I felt fine, energetic, but she looked furious and seething, unquote. Alright, so I'm going to discuss this whole paragraph. Your experience within the conversation towards the woman, if you self-honestly investigate your physical experience in relation to the energy that you were accessing, was kind of heightened, like you were in a heightened sense of awareness. Your body was stiff and your eyes were quite tight, like a physical tightness. That's also an indication of when you're attempting to or trying to hold your pose within and as a particular energy to convey a point of rightness, in attempting to or trying to prove something to someone when you in fact do not stand within certainty and stability about the point that you're discussing, and then to try and attempt to make the point real or right or justified, you go into that stance of fighting within that energy and holding yourself as the point in trying to attempting to make the point real. So your actual interaction with the woman was within a fighting stance, as an energetic attack, so to speak, but not in terms of force. The attack was more knowledge and information based, because in terms of the situation with the child, you were actually highlighting your own view or opinion on the matter, exactly as the woman did. So both of you were conveying your opinions or views or perceptions or ideas about the child and the point that you were facing. And in that, both of you clashed because your views or opinions or experiences or perceptions of the point were in polarity with each other, and that's basically the event that took place. So both went into like a fighting, polarity, clashing stance in attempting to make right or make real your stance in relation to this point with the child. So in terms of, for example, getting the piercing within the child, that's not a symbol of harm or forgiveness or even rebelling against the system. I mean, there may be multidimensional facets in relation to that person's decision in relation to having the piercing that has no context whatsoever to the rules that you perceived or interpreted the child's stance to be in relation to the piercing. So you actually, within your point towards the child, you're projecting your own issues about or of rules through the child and trying to attempt to fight them through the conversation. So what you were actually highlighting within this whole situation was that all in all, your experience had nothing to do with the woman or the child, or why the child particularly specifically had the piercing, but with yourself. You were facing your own reactions towards rules. And thus you were in essence projecting your own issues unto the child and through the woman. So the woman basically represented the whole principle of rules. The child, for example, represented you towards the rules, and you were thus trying to fight or make sense of or figure out this whole affliction within yourself in relation to rules and authority through others, and projecting actually your self-experience onto and through them. So I suggest what you should investigate is, in fact, your reaction towards the woman. For example, who she represents in your world of your past. Because obviously, in terms of the moment you faced her, you immediately went in like a defense attack mode, in wanting to take in a stance of power and superiority. So then you can, for example, look at her in a point of, or as a point of authority that you faced within yourself, or that this whole scenario actually played out in relation to, for example, you relating yourself to the woman as being your mother and the child being you, and your whole past experiences in relation to breaking the rules and rebelling against rules because of your relationship drama with your own mother, or just females in general. So you've got to investigate self-honestly what this whole scenario was playing out in relation to you yourself, because if you have a look at your entire post, it was very much in relation to blaming the rules or the child or the woman within the point of what you experienced, instead of having a look at what is it that you actually faced within yourself. So be careful of projecting onto others, or even projecting oneself into an idea of equality when self in fact has not yet stood within proving self-equality to self. You're still in the process of establishing equality, and what that in fact really actually means for yourself. So first understand self-equality before attempting to trying to project an idea of knowledge and information in relation to equality through others. Process is about focusing on self first. So always relate whatever and whoever you face back to self. Like, for example, this scenario with the woman and the child. What does that child represent in relation to self? What does the woman represent in relation to self? What does the whole play out of that moment reflect about of self within self? Alright, so Aileen, just that to take into consideration in relation to your application within writing. And then also just some points here with regards to your self-forgiveness. Then you've got to revisit your self-forgiveness in relation to this point, because then your self-forgiveness is not valid. Not valid meaning, I'm not meaning it in a bad way as it's wrong. You have to revisit your self-forgiveness in relation to the point of you've now applied your self-forgiveness within your initial belief as interpretation or perception, an idea about what it is that you experienced, and thus your self-forgiveness is actually validating your belief, idea, and perception in relation to the whole situation that you faced, instead of actually being self-forgiveness. So here, for example, and I quote, "I am afraid of the demon I saw waking up inside her as I stood my ground as one and equal to her professionally," unquote. Obviously, in relation to this self-forgiveness statement, for example, the point of you standing equal to and one with the being was not so. In fact, your self-forgiveness would thus more read in the lines of, in terms of equality in oneness, would be I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to separate myself from the demonic nature that I have seen within this being as me, and within that accepted and allowed separation, I have reacted within and as fear. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to react in fear towards the demonic nature that I see or saw within another as me. I forgive myself that I hadn't accepted and allowed myself to realize that that demonic nature that I had seen and reacted towards within another as me is in fact me, that I was seeing as others are the mirror of me as me here. And so you will, for example, your self-forgiveness will be about self, in seeing what it is that self was actually in fact doing, seeing and experiencing within that moment. And then also in terms of your self-forgiveness, I suggest taking into consideration, utilizing the words, I forgive myself for accepting and allowing myself. Because in that statement, I forgive myself for accepting and allowing myself, the acceptance point is the word that release you from the becoming of you as the particular point you're applying self-forgiveness for, and the allowing is for having allowed yourself to separate yourself into and as that becoming and abdicate your responsibility towards the point that you're facing. And thus, if you do not utilize the words accept and allow, or accepting and allowing, you actually reiterate the point that you're applying self-forgiveness for, because you're not actually releasing yourself within and as the words through and as self-forgiveness. Then another example here, and I quote, I forgive myself for being powerful when I stand my ground and express myself as equal to another human being. Here you're facing perception, again as an idea of power and an idea of equality. In terms of when you stand your ground, there is no energy involved, there is no experience involved, and the very point of standing your ground is a stance of defense and fight. When you speak or when you're here and directive, you're stable, you're silent, you breathe, you're comfortable, you're basically normal, so to speak. It's like I'm speaking with you here now. General conversation that's comfortable, here as breath. And you should consider, in terms of, again, looking at your whole post, in how you actually took a militant stance towards this person. And you've got to then investigate your moment before you approached the woman, and having a look at what was the thoughts that came up, what was your reactions and your energies towards this whole situation before you approached it. In that you will find how you actually created yourself into an as energy and an ego personality of superiority towards the being, maybe even in the idea, belief or perception that you created that you were equal to her, when in fact you are only equal to your own energy or ideal belief and perception within yourself. And then I further suggest, in terms of reading through your self-forgiveness, is taking on the idea, perception and belief of power that you have within yourself, and understand that process is not about power or being powerful. It's about being here, living here in the physical, and we do that in terms of assisting and supporting ourselves and applying self-forgiveness through seeing what it is that we're accepting and allowing within ourselves and our world, and that situations and people actually reflect parts of ourselves. So just some support and assistance to take into consideration as you're applying yourself in your world and your reality. Thank you.